So around interoperability, I think I just have something to posit that you guys could either agree or disagree with, but I think it starts with the message transport layer, because if two agents can't communicate with each other, then they can't be interoperable. And so I think that's kind of how we might want to think about things, where our different companies' agents, as long as they can communicate, the agent's understanding of another agent can be handled in like the process logic and the prompt and the back end. But like the first step is them communicating over a shared channel.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there was, when you were presenting, there was quite a few people actually commenting on that. Also regarding Orbis, you obviously presented XMPP. Yeah, I think we just have to work out how to connect all these things. Simple, but
yeah, my take is a little bit that kind of this some basic form of communication can actually happen on chain, or kind of can happen. Or I think this idea of having a representation or on-chain representation of an agent that you can call is quite powerful. Of course, that leads, or kind of there are limitations of that, and then you want to go beyond that, and you want to have then pure off-chain communication. But I would certainly advocate to say the composability of on-chain is quite strong. And there are many things. As soon as you want to have kind of whatever, even simple things like a multisig or kind of additional rules of how to communicate, then that's hard to replicate in pure off-chain protocols.
Yeah, and that's on the crypto side as well. Then we need to figure out, like, on the AI side, how are these agents gonna, communicate? What are the semantics of that language and stuff? So there's really a lot of work to do on both sides, I'd say.
I mean, I can also say something on the message protocol. Like, there's the transport protocol, there's the namespace, you nicely put that on, and then there's like the message protocol, like the communication protocol, for instance, HTTP. And then there's lots of others. And they need to be considered differently. Although with LLMs, you have the benefit that you don't necessarily need to worry too much about bridging those. So it's mostly about, I've got like an agent that's assumed for the moment for simplicity is represented by a wallet. Let's assume it's basically the curve Ethereum uses. So you end up having this job of mapping that wallet address to some location in the network where this wallet is actually receiving messages. And like, yeah, I mean, XMTP does that, Wallet Connect, like lots of them do that. I think some of them are more or less decentralized. And then like what Martin was saying, there's these big questions around how do you incorporate multisigs into the system in a meaningful way. And so I think like most practically, what would be helpful is to just sort of asynchronously connect and like in a shared space, like an Ocean doc or whatever, and throw together these design consideration, because I think everyone brings insights into different parts of this problem and like technologies they're already working with. And then we can figure out where the pain points are. And I'm sure most of this is solved in some form or another already. We just need to connect it.
I can ask a question that's come in via text. I'll throw it to the panel. Jonas would like to know, what role will solutions like CCIP from Chainlink play in the future?
I can't say much on that. Anyone able to comment on that?
like CCIP is cross-chain messaging in a sense, I think. So either agents could be the source of a message into CCIP, which would then probably go to a smart contract, or agents could be listening to certain output from a smart contract through CCIP. I'm not super familiar with that, but I think like as you talk to a bot, one thing I've been thinking about is how outside of the user input to the bot, so like the user chat, the bot can be basically looking at other data sources, say for the receipt of a token, or basically any sort of API could change the bot's behavior from one state to another. And so the CCIP data, like if it's watching a smart contract, the bot could react to changes in the smart contract, which seems useful.
I'd actually love to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Martin.
I'm just again saying one more kind of argument for experimenting with somewhat putting more of the messaging on chain is this idea of callbacks, or kind of the idea that a response can actually be a smart contract call back into another agent that then might trigger the next action. So kind of just this idea, or I mean, I feel like kind of that unlocks quite a bit of composability.
I have another question from Mark Hampton. I think some of you may have a take on. What do you think about this one? Won't AI in the near future enable heterogeneous protocols for communication? I think probably.
Not sure I fully get the framing of the question, so maybe I'm off. But like, yeah, I think it will be totally heterogeneous, and I think like basically with LLMs at the communicate, like basically, if you go back in multi-agent system literature, then they will have like all these very structured messaging protocols which sit on top of the transport, right? So transport is about getting the message from A to B somewhere in the network. And let's assume we're now in this place where the agent process is located. And now you're going to have to interpret the message. There's been like FIPA protocol, which was like, one of the earlier ones, and just been like tons of different protocols, very structured. I think with LLMs, a lot of this basically goes away, I would assume. And you basically just, as long as it's message-based communication, the system at the other end can figure out what the heck this is. You already see this with JSON. If you just give it to like any form of data, if you give it to an LLM, it's pretty confident in figuring it out. Obviously, there's a lot of edge cases and a lot of work to be done, but I don't think we'll go back to something like super structured on this level. On the transport level, yes. Also on the transport level, just want to tack one thing on. I think like it's going to have to be as open as possible. Like anyone trying to place their token there and kind of gate it in some complicated way, I don't think that's going to happen. Basically, at the end of the day, you just need to map an address to a network location. And there's some work to be done to maintain these mappings as like DHTs, for instance, like, academia style or otherwise, but that's about it. And then you're kind of talking to the other entity.
This one's got a couple of clauses, so you'll have to follow along with me, or maybe you can read it for yourself in the chat. But Daniel Ong has a thought here. Is there a way to create a GPU overlay network for Ethereum or Gnosis validators? Nowadays, Ethereum and Gnosis validators don't require a GPU, yet there's still a lot of validators who are used to running GPUs from the proof of work days. He then says this could be an opt-in network like EigenLayer, and people pay to use the GPU overlay network for inference or training. And he wonders if there's interesting applications where the settlement and payments layers are tightly coupled with the compute networks. Does anybody see anything like that? Maybe not, but definitely seems plausible. But yeah, like I think with as David has kind of alluded to with a lot of this stuff, there's many things that are possible. It's just we're still very, very early. So it can be hard to take an idea like that and say, will someone build something like that? Maybe. There's nothing stopping them other than, you know, money, time, and attention, right?
So I'll have one question here for Richard, because my understanding would be that training generally, like, you're already like orders of magnitude away from what can happen in a centralized facility. So you kind of, you're not playing like massive backup catch up. Whereas I think like fine tuning is where it's at, but like Richard is way more versed in this area. So tell me more.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the gradient free stuff doesn't require any training at all. So like that's where I'm hoping to start with a lot of these decentralized compute infrastructures. Like we're exploring with Giza Tech to create like a prompt engineering workflow or assistant that will hopefully deploy on chain. I think that would be super cool, and that will just like make API calls to the language model, which is the compute intensive part, I guess. Yeah, then like I'm not sure if anyone saw the Q-LoRa technique just came out this week, but it's basically like a really easy way of fine-tuning a pre-trained language model. I think someone said that like you'll be able to like fine-tune on like a smartphone while it like plugs in into the wall at night, and that you'll be able to fine tune. So that's kind of the stage that we're getting to, and we're going to get to with these language models. So yeah, still like, you know, training the language model the first time is going to require a ton of compute, but like at least after it's trained, we'll be able to like fine tune it for specific applications, or maybe even run these like applications on top of the models. By the way, I got to jump. It's been a real pleasure, and hopefully we can do this again soon. It's been great to see everyone come together. So really enjoyed. Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot, Richard. It's great to have you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, so we are coming up to the end of the time that we allotted for group discussion. We can keep going. You're free to continue the discussion if you'd like, but if you've got other commitments, feel free to jump off now, because this is technically the end of our time. With that being said, I'll also use this as an opportunity to thank all of you for sharing your time, energy, attention, expertise with us. It greatly exceeded my expectations, which were already high. So thank you for that. And thank you to everybody who attended. We've got a ton of questions that I am saving all of these, and so maybe I'll throw them to any of the panelists that want to stick on in the future. But I want to thank everybody for coming together to contribute both sides of this little project that we have here, the presenters who are sharing their time and expertise with you all, and then our audience, because if they were speaking to an empty room, there's really no point in this. So I want to thank everybody for sharing this event with their network. We definitely wouldn't have had such good attendance without you letting the people that pay attention to you know that you're going to be here. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody for contributing to the community-driven project. It's really nice to see, and this is how you grow big things, is with these small first steps. So thank you all very much. For those of you who do want to stay on, we had an interesting question from Jonas about Ethereum-specific training data for LLM fine-tuning, and how would you get that going? That's an interesting question. I think it would be interesting to know why you would need it to be Ethereum specific. If you have I mean, maybe I'll let somebody with more technical expertise take it, but if you have a good connection to, if you have a good connection between the two, does it really matter if the training data is Ethereum specific as long as it works?
Yeah, what's the goal with the Ethereum specific data? What should the agent later do? Should he trade for you, or like what do you want to do? What's the goal? Should he do MEV or something? I don't know, like that's always depends. If you want an agent, what is the goal in the end with the data for AI?
So I think like I mean, by no means are we particularly well placed to answer this question yet, but like the MEC project, which was presented by Martin and which I referenced in my presentation, could be, well, we're currently working on a use case where we extend that so that as part of this callback, which Martin was referring to, you don't just get delivered back the prompt result, let's say. You can also have an on-chain execution of something else. So you get your delivery of your data blob, which lives off-chain, plus maybe you execute a transfer or an EVM transaction of a different kind, like a swap. And I think there's a lot of projects who, for obvious reasons, looking at going from natural language to transaction execution. And yeah, I guess we need like some sort of place where these pairs accrue, i.e. the prompt and the actual transaction data. And if I get that question right, that's what they're sort of on about. And so if you had like a place where a lot of these pairs live, then you could start using that to fine tune with one of the many methods which are being explored. Meher, are you gonna comment on that?
No, I have a different question I'd like to pose.
Okay. Robin, did you want to add something to this? Otherwise, we go to Meher's questions.
No, it's fine for me. It's okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So my question is regarding the autonomous view of, building these DAOs essentially, which are like, agents that are kind of co-owned on the network. For a DAO to be truly autonomous, my sense is that an agent, we need to have some kind of agent that can self-stabilize its own execution. Meaning, ultimately, when you think of an agent, it is some kind of daemon that is running on a Linux machine. It has a certain set of computational resources, and it can have errors in its logs. And some engineer is coming and fixing those errors and giving more computational resources to this agent based on the utilization of that agent. So there's always a human that's keeping that agent running. Is there any design or project that would make a self-stabilizing agent, meaning an agent that can analyze its own logs and fix its own issues and thus keep running autonomously?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think a lot of people, I mean, in a small sense, a lot of people are experimenting with this. So if you look at like people using basically things like RoboGPT, AutoGPT, LangChain to basically put the interpreter in the loop, and then they effectively have the program try to converge on like some useful actual program, which they're trying to then execute in some context, like subprogram. So I think basically the thing to do is just keep watching what happens. So that's how we look at it. Like you need for the DAO, you need a substrate where they can own off-chain infrastructure. And that could be a roll-up, or that could like where lots of people write two transactions, or that could be an autonomous system that doesn't necessarily receive transactions, but kind of generates them by itself and then kind of acts upon the underlying chains. We're taking that second approach, and I think both of them are super valid, and both of them will come together. And then like you just basically wait and see what all this amazing ecosystem is doing in order to get us closer to this kind of truly autonomous system in a sense. And I mean, then you're, like, I guess the question is at which point do you bridge over into some form of super intelligence? And I guess then we're kind of overlapping with a lot of these other questions which are being asked more in the sort of traditional AI space. And I don't pretend that I know anything there. I think a lot of these things are not crypto questions. They're basically just like AI questions, which then will apply themselves to the space as well. I think where the crypto question comes in is how do I own my off-chain system in a decentralized or verifiable way? And that's basically roll-up ZKML and the kind of autonomous type systems. Even if you have ZK, you will still need data to come from various places, and you will probably want a node system, which kind of takes that, because the oracle problem will always exist. Like if I need to read data from multiple places, my ZK algorithm doesn't help me with that, because ultimately it's about the source of that data, right? So yeah, that's kind of what I can say about this. Should we wrap up?
Yeah, let's call it. So that'll be the end. I actually have another call to get on. So
right. Sorry, Thomas.
I'll have to call it there. But yeah, thank you, Meher. I appreciate your
nice meeting you. Bye.
Nice meeting you. Bye.
Cool.
I like this question from Adriano, who's a team member at Valerie. Adriano asked what we see as the foundational building blocks of a decentralized operating system for AI.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think I responded on it as well, and it depends like what you mean by building blocks, I guess. So there's like kind of the LLM building blocks, and there's also the crypto building blocks. So I tend to think of the building blocks more as on the LLM side. So these are things like, for example, a knowledge base, maybe like a data lake, maybe some sort of like long-term memory store where you can store information that is like larger than can fit in the prompt, for example. Also like tools and APIs, also like registries,
oh my goodness,
different apps and stuff. And yeah, so these are some of the different building blocks, the different like components, and then all of these different building blocks should run on top of decentralized infrastructure. And these different infrastructure components could be things like, decentralized storage, like IPFS, decentralized compute protocols, decentralized marketplace protocols, decentralized access control. All of these different technologies can be used to implement these different building blocks.
Yeah. I would just say one of the big things is not for everyone to come in this space to try and not reinvent the wheel. Like we should really need to leverage the fact that we're all building on common standards on top of kind of like Ethereum, on top of EVM, even Solana. Like we're using common standards for our wallets. Like we can use transactions for Etherscan for being able to see kind of like a provenance on there. So except using kind of like NFTs, ERC20s, and like don't everyone try to reinvent the wheel. Everyone can find like a special niche that they provide and not have to work. And then that's how we kind of beat Web 2, understanding that like everyone's working on the same stuff as opposed to everyone trying to make their specific proprietary one the winner.
Yeah, along those lines, actually, I saw something yesterday that was really fascinating. It was a guy who's creating a DSL, a domain-specific language specific to image generation prompts. If you've ever tried to do image generation, you get into all these like weird, quirky things, rendered on Octane to get like really high resolution, like beautiful, like volumetric lighting and things like that. And so like this person tried to like codify how objects interrelate in the context of an image and has like a structured approach to it. So I think I agree with you, Christian. I think it's important to sort of think about the standards, but some people are actually really pushing the envelope and creating new ones that are very, very creative. I thought that was one of the cooler projects I've seen in recent days. I encourage you all to check it out.
This is a big open question, whether like natural language is the best thing to use for prompts. A lot of people are creating like pseudo languages. So there's like pseudo lang and stuff, which is just much more specific. I guess it's language that is more like code so that there's less nuance in it. So there's some really interesting stuff on that too.
Yeah, if you ever try to get GPT-4 to compress some paragraph into the smallest possible string of characters and emojis, it's actually amazing how much it can compress and decompress. It's almost like a pseudo embedding. It'd be exciting to sort of explore that a little bit more deeply. How do you all think about the sort of UX, UI? I think it's been really interesting to see how something like ChatGPT sort of already existed for a few years, and then really it was like the chat interface that really resonated with users. Are you all aware of any interesting alternatives or sort of explorations that people are thinking about?
Yeah, I think chat is just the first interface for sure, and I don't think we want to turn everything into a text box. So there's like a lot of people talking about how we can move beyond the text box, and people are even starting to explore, dynamically generating UIs that might be ephemeral, which I think is super cool. And there's actually something Valerie kind of put me onto like finite state machines a lot, because that's what they use in their agent framework. And just by chance, I came across. I was thinking about the intersection of agents and finite state machines in general. So in other words, rather than using like chains and workflows, should we be using finite state machines in LangChain, which I think was a really interesting idea. And I sent out a tweet on Twitter saying, anyone thinking about the intersection of finite state machines and agents? And someone wrote back from the front end space. And there's like a whole bunch of like new front end frameworks that are also using finite state machines to transition between states. And so like what I'm thinking now is, how do like finite state machines on the like ML side, how can they tie in with finite state machines on the front end, and maybe even tie in with like finite state machines on the back end as well? If we can create these different states in all of the different places, and that's so depending on which state we're in the finite state machine, it like generates a new UI. I think that could be really, really interesting.
That's really cool. Yeah. I encourage you to talk to people in gaming. Folks who are developing NPCs, they think a lot about FSMs, especially now in the context of these LLMs. I think maybe they have some interesting ideas.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I guess like what's kind of happened is that the UI has become such a focus, like almost to the point where, like, not in the last few months, like with technology over the last 2 decades, to the focus, which has created this kind of focus on people basically going around, clicking around, doing things. Like it's very focused on the user doing things. And I think like there's still like this, like people talking a lot about autonomous agents now, but I think what they haven't quite grokked yet is that this is not about you interacting with your autonomous agent all the time. It's about the autonomous agent ultimately being autonomous and creating outcomes for you, where you can kind of get time back effectively from looking at the screen, clicking around on the screen, doing all this stuff. I mean, if you zoom out, like it's not ideal how increasingly we're even more tied to the screen and have to do even more. So I think that's where Valerie ultimately kind of also focuses on. It's like this idea of autonomy and kind of effectively almost like kind of having the machines create outcomes for you. And that's in a way kind of everyone today talked about this. But I think there's still a lot to be done to bring that into the user experience of new products, where we often start out basically with like preconception of, oh, I need like a website with a login bar, and then like it needs to look like this and so on. So I think we're very early there, basically.
Yeah,
I'd love to get your perspective. Oh,
I was just gonna say, from a US perspective, I also think that I guess my camera went off because I have bad connection. But anyway, yeah, I think one of the cool things for UX that crypto can really help in is I think in the future, people aren't going to want to kind of choose a particular provider of like their autonomous agent or tool and then upload all their data and then be stuck with them. Or they're not going to want to have to redo that process every time they want to try out a new service and go through that entire process again of re-uploading and then having their data stored there. Where it's like we're kind of repeating the same problems we've had with like kind of network effects, where once you get a lot of people, you kind of have that data advantage. Where I think what crypto can do really cool is make it possible for people to upload their data one time to either decentralized storage, then kind of tokenize their access to that, then allow to share access easily between these different providers, like, and allow them to kind of take access to use my data. Here's the context to personalize your experience and easily revoke it away. So now, similar to the concept of you only have to log in one time with Web3 when you ever connect to a site, it's going to be the same thing here, where you're going to want to upload your data one time and then just share access to it to these different providers instead of re-uploading it for every different one you choose.
Well, I don't know if you saw this, Christian, but Peter had a question directed towards you about how we can open source data models and while still maintaining high quality standards.
So So I think for that, it's like a really cool thing is being able to start leveraging the ability to kind of like tokenize and put on chain like the records of human eval that goes into it. And so one thing with Ocean, some example use case, okay, someone publishes a data set, they've tied what the schema is, like what the data model is for creating it, and now people want to judge how good it is. And so when people kind of attach their identity to, okay, I'm a human evaluator, I have a credentials to actually be judging this and kind of be doing this well. I'm attesting that I'm also going to be judging it to the best of my ability. And so then we can run that model and then conduct those kind of like screenings. Okay, this data set actually did produce a model that outbeat these other models on the LLM leaderboard. And this transaction hash right here is kind of where I immediately put my kind of the directions and the methodology I went into for grading it. So then instead of having the LLM leaderboards where we're trying to reconnect, people publish their paper on one site, their data set linked to another one, their human eval another place, they can kind of have like a single source of truth using on-chain as a ledger for connecting all these different pieces together. And so you can have full auditability of how a data set was created from and who it was created from, who evaluated the data set, what type of model was trained on it. And so by literally allowing this kind of like single source of truth all on the same transaction rails, I think we can kind of allow like spreading of open data models while still allowing kind of like transparency and like commercial viability and high standards. Like one thing I think is really cool is the concept of being able to connect all these different AI papers to have them directly be attached to the code and like the data sets they created where, okay, we created our paper directly and here are our results, like the transaction half of how we immediately put our results in. So now it's also another additional benefits for recreating where now it's like for recreating, all you have to do is kind of run it yourself on your own servers, on your own infrastructure, and you should be able to get the same results. And so it's just a lot less like duplication of work where we can start to embrace how you can like have an immutable source of truth by using crypto in this space.
Cool. I'll also answer the first part of the question. Peter asked when our next event would be. So soon. I think we'd definitely like to do this again. I would be curious to hear from our speakers what our topics could be. I think that would be the next step would be to choose another specific topic like this where we can advance the conversation in a particular direction. Once we do that, we can, I would definitely like to take Katie's feedback into account and look for different perspectives. Particularly, I also did quite like the idea of taking these bias deflecting perspectives into account because that's something that's coming up in like all of these systems. Anytime you build a system, you're running the risk of even by unintentionally or intentionally or unintentionally adding in these biases in it. So that's definitely something we could think about. If you'd like to reach out with maybe feedback about what ideas you think we could have for our next session or potential speakers that might be willing to participate, you can get in touch with me on either the Valerie Twitter account or my own personal account, which is @ThomasMoonbriar. Because we have a couple more minutes left, let me just quickly, okay. Well, Joel's gone, but thank you very much for that. I don't see any more text questions. We said we would have maybe about 15 or 20 minutes of discussion. So maybe we can have some, final thoughts here, and then I can let you guys go.
I think what will be exciting to see, and I don't think we covered it very much today, is with this arrival of so many machines on the scene, what that will do for products and curation and these online experiences. So in a way, like I see everything you were saying, Christian. In another way, I'm also just like, well, can't the machine just do it? Like a lot of it seems we're still thinking in a very human-centric way where we haven't really appreciated how much like autonomous machines can actually do for us. And I think that will, just break up even more in the coming months because it will just accelerate.
One thing is, have any of you guys attempted to kind of create your own like good data sets for fine tuning a model for any particular purpose? Like an experience like trying that out?
I think like we're more focused on like building with LLMs, I suppose. I think that's a really interesting thing thing that data marketplaces could be used for, which they're not at the moment, which is like storing the context that's used to drive in context learning or any of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I guess like just to agree with David, I think like what we're definitely most interested in Algovera is the app layer. I feel like we're always talking about like infrastructure in the crypto space, and I think like what we're really missing are the use cases and applications. So like what I'm really excited about is stuff like what David presented, which are like all of these different LLM apps that are currently running on Autonomous, and I'd really love to build a builder community around this, and that's why I kind of wanted to like go back to basics and talk about the different LLM components and how everyone can use these to like build LLM apps. And you don't need to be a machine learning engineer because it's actually like really accessible. There's like JavaScript versions, there's Python versions. And yeah, I'd really love to just create this builder community, not just around like crypto infrastructure, but also LLM apps, but in the crypto space. I think that would be super valuable, building different agents, building different workflows, building different assistants. And hopefully this is one of the things that is going to be built at the hackathon around ETHCC that like many people here are co-organizing or sponsoring. Just in case anyone hasn't heard about it, we're going to have like 100 hackers at a 2-day event in Paris. We're actually going to announce it today, I think. So that's going to be super cool, just like bringing the AI world and the crypto world together. A bunch of AI sponsors like Stability AI, Hugging Face, Llama Index coming together with a bunch of like crypto infrastructure as well. So hopefully a bunch of like stuff is going to blossom with that, and we can just like really kickstart this builder community around like LLM apps running on decentralized infrastructure.
Awesome. Thank you guys all so much. We're at 20 minutes past the hour now, so we're already quite a bit over time. I want to thank everybody who presented. Feel free to drop off if you're done. I'd love for you to keep up to date with us. You can follow us on Twitter, Valerie AG. I'll be posting a recap link to everyone's talks. Also the entire conference event. If you want to watch all of the talks, maybe you missed one, you can check that out. It'll probably be going out. It takes me a little while to edit the video, but it usually over the next week, you'll see the talks and content that were presented today. And I'll also be trying to gather up as many links to slides, resources from our speakers. And yeah, I just want to thank all of our attendees today and all of our speakers for contributing. You guys did a really excellent job, and I think we all learned a lot. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
I mean, I can think of a bunch of ways. I mean, presentations from Sam, Emma, and Lewis probably all apply to some extent or another in what we're doing at the LeapPad. So like, for example, for Lewis's presentation, I'm the only researcher, so I'll say but I've definitely been considering exploring prediction markets for it's kind of like there's this really interesting protocol called TrueBit, which some of you may have heard of, which was kind of for verifiable computation, and it had some limitations and so on, but they did have this mechanism in there using taxes and jackpots. So like everybody gets taxed a bit and it puts into a jackpot, and if you find like somebody cheated, then you get the jackpot, and that's how you. But then you force errors into the thing, so people will definitely find errors, and that's how you incentivize checking and so on and so forth. There's a way you can incentivize checking. You can use taxes as well, and like kind of modify the concept of participatory budgeting, which is like you decide where your taxes go, and so you could get taxed, but you could decide where to in a prediction market, like who do you want to bet on that is going to be honest whenever they get checked and so on. You could have kind of staking and slashing in that regard. And like PolyGPT, I mean, you could, like I was saying with the LLM stuff, you could totally change kind of natural language and so on into a JSON format and stuff for like running scheduling and so on, and scheduling algorithms. And then that's what Sam described is and especially with obviously the pricing model, like we're obviously looking at pricing models as well. And so, but especially I really wanted to ask about like if you considered like, because it seemed like it was only like a one-time kind of exchange, as in like somebody bid, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like somebody bid, and then if the bid was lower than the ask, then like there was no match at all. But it seemed like there was no negotiation in that. So like, is it possible to introduce negotiation with autonomous agents and so on and so forth? It's kind of something that I was thinking about. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of kind of intermixing.
Sorry, Levi, were you asking a question? Were you asking that to me?
I was just like, I mean, Thomas asked what overlap is there, and I'm like, I see tons of overlap.
Yeah, there are. I agree. I mean, imagine, imagine like on the. I think there are a lot of marketplaces, of course, in crypto, and I wonder if we should work on standardization for at least for interfaces. Every marketplace will probably have like a not proprietary, but a distinct implementation. But I wonder if we could work on like standardization for abstracting the implementation for agents to participate in these various marketplaces, and that'll make it easier for people to extend work from one project to another to collaborate.
Yeah, and actually, I just wanted to add to like enable that abstraction easier. What PolyGPT is built on is the polywrap wraps, which I mentioned briefly. But the concept of wraps is basically how we can abstract the functionality from its backend or architectural part and standardization. And we're basically building these like blocks where the interface is going to be same regardless of which protocol you're interacting with. But inside, the logic can keep changing, and that's totally fine, and no one needs to worry about it. So that would be quite interesting, actually, Sam. Like we could connect and talk more about it of building wraps for your marketplace standardization.
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. So
I have one other idea that I wanted to throw out there, and Emma, your presentation reminded me of this. So, I wonder if it would be interesting for imagine, back in the day, there used to be this thing called like robots.txt that people who were running websites would include in their backends for search engines to understand about like more about the site. I'm not sure all what went into the robots.txt, but I think it helped it understand like the site architecture and stuff. Imagine if we had something similar for LLMs. Imagine like if every GitHub project had something that was specifically for LLMs to consume, for LLMs to understand how to work with that GitHub project. And that way, if you were building like LLM systems that wanted to like use the software in those GitHub projects, it could go to the repos and have like a file that was just for the LLMs to read. So it quickly understood like, hey, this is what this project is. This is how you build it. Here are the interfaces, and here's how you use it. Really customized for LLM consumption. And that way, if you're building these sort of like, systems building systems, it would be easier for the LLM to figure out how to build stuff.
Cool. So I'm going to ask Sandeep's question from earlier. The question was originally for Oak and related to what he was talking about, but I think all of you maybe would have an interesting take on it. So I'll have him answer it first, and then if you want to riff on it, please do. So Sandeep's question was, what are the top risks you see for a power to the people version of decentralization as a response to an institutional empire? Which, yeah, I think that's kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of this idea of the centralization, consolidation of power in the hands of Web 2 companies and government structures versus this Web 3 decentralized model where ideally we would have people owning that value. So yeah, Oak, if you want to.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think basically that my bias would be towards putting as much power into like to the edges as possible and towards individuals and smaller organizations, because I think we're so far at the other extreme right now that it's to worry about the opposite is I don't think we'll get too far in worrying about the opposite. I mean, I think we have a very unique capability, being at the intersection of AI and crypto, to put AIs, to put autonomous agents into the control and ownership of individuals and smaller organizations. And I think that at this point that's
only good things relative to the current situation that we have today are going to come out of that. But I'm certainly curious to hear any of my other co-panelists here. I think there are severe risks. I'm very happy to hear them.
Yeah, and I think another comment we have expands on a similar idea, asking about a take on personal agents giving disproportional digital empowerment to those who are leveraging them over those who are not tech proficient.
Well, I think the interesting thing there is that, and we didn't get to go into this too much today, but I think most people's presentations did touch on it, is that the level of the sort of the abstraction that autonomous agents provide once they're working properly is such that even the least technical people should be able to get an enormous amount of value out of them. And I think in actual fact, it could be a real leveler across individuals using technology. I mean, obviously today, it's, I think, you know, particularly Emma was pointing out with tools like AutoGPT, it's like still an extremely kind of technical experience. You have to be quite technically proficient to get anything very much at all out of autonomous agents. But certainly the goal, I think, that everybody really should be pointing towards is to you know, abstract as much of that away as possible, such that it's incredibly easy and simple, and that then the majority of people can really get much more out of it. Sorry, Levi, you were coming in. Over to you.
I was going to say pretty much the same thing you said. That it's a certainly in terms of the tech proficiency, I think it's a leveler. I mean, a lot of for example, if we could just take a look at the you know, like, are there going to be programmers in 5 years? That whole, you know, kind of scary question, which is like, well, the implication is that, you know, coding is going to be so accessible to so many people that you know, the nature of, you know, the job won't exist. I mean, I don't think that's going to be the case, but like, you know, that's kind of the implication behind that fear. And so I'm not so concerned about the tech proficiency aspect of it. I am a bit concerned, actually, though, about the kind of potentially like runaway AI scenario. That does concern me a bit more. What I will say is that I remember having a lot of like serious conversations about this in Paris, you know, with a lot of like kind of like the hackathon and so on and so forth about these problems. What the alternative is to regulation, right? I mean, just kind of, and then we know where that goes. I mean, what it means is that a bunch of, you know, centralized players kind of determine the future of AI, and which is probably very unlikely to be successful anyways, just because, you know, all of this stuff is going to the open source model. What was that, like that famous memo from Google, like OpenAI has no moat and neither do we. So it's very likely, I think, that open source models are going to win out. And then if they are going to win out, the question is, you know, if people start trying to do bad things with them, I think the inevitable result is that like good people are going to try to counter that and do good things with them. And we, you know, so I think that when we enable people to, we empower people and give them the tools to be able to do what they want with this, that's probably the kind of, that's kind of like almost kind of like the collective Nash equilibrium of the, and maybe Nash equilibrium it's not always the best equilibrium. Maybe we can find better equilibrium than the Nash equilibrium, but worst case scenario, we give everybody their own kind of personal AI agents and let them modify them and try to do, you know, come up with the best outcomes that they can, because the alternative is, well, it becomes only some people are able to do it. And then, well, that's a kind of, we know where that might lead. That I think that's probably a lot worse.
I think I'll give a less rosy response. I believe that we're entering this is a new technology which requires, like, you just like when printing became
widespread. People either had to learn to read or they were illiterate. Similarly, people are going to need to either learn how to work with agents or they won't be able to. And in my opinion, everybody will need, I think that everybody will need to improve three things. One, their communications abilities in general, going deeper in whatever their level of expertise is, and understanding how to build complex systems. And with those things, communication, expertise, and knowledge of complex systems, and with those skills, they'll be able to orchestrate the tools that are going to be emerging.
It's this weird disconnect between, on the one hand side, these LLMs are usable by like people who haven't really been able to use any like more sophisticated technology before. So I'm seeing like my parents are using it, right? Maybe they've not been the earliest adopters of other technologies so far, right? But then on the I feel like there we're good, right? And in a way that sort of that's a level playing field. But then I think the other, I think the where my fear would come in would be the cost of, or kind of if you have a marginally better LLM, either that has better training or because you have more compute because you can afford it, or because you know how to run it on your home setup. So I feel like that's going to be the disconnect. Like everyone is going to use an LLM, but then some people might be able to pay the ChatGPT Premium Plus subscription, which is like 10 times as much, and then they're just like only marginally better, but that's enough to be like more intelligent than everyone else, kind of. So to me, that's interesting thing is on the one side, like democratizing technology, everyone can use it, but then on the other side, like the small differences become more relevant, and yeah.
Cool. Well, I love that. I love that slightly optimistic note, and I think that's a great place to end it. I know we have more questions, but this is the amount of time that we've allotted today. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time and expertise and for joining the open discussion. I think we had some really great presentations and some great discussion. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you to all of our attendees. There will be a replay of this available over the coming weeks. We'll be releasing some content, the individual talks and the entire recording. So please follow Valerie AG on Twitter if you want to be the first to see those. And thank you very much, all of you, for your time and attention.